I didn't kill my son.
And your lies only just shows how despicable you are. No mercy for your type.
Mrs. Eleanor, you have been convicted for the murder of Samuel.
In the summer of 1934, the wind carried dust across the Missouri flatlands like ghosts searching for a home they'd never find. That summer, when Thomas Avery was 6 years old, his mother left him on the steps of the Rockford County orphanage with nothing but a note pinned to his shirt that read, "His name is Thomas. I can't feed him no more." He remembered her face only in fragments, the hollow of her cheeks, the way her hands shook when she kissed his forehead one last time, the sound of her shoes on gravel as she walked away without looking back. He stood on those steps until Sister Margaret found him at dawn, still clutching the note, his lips cracked from thirst and sun. The orphanage was a 3-story brick building that had once been a hotel. Its corridors smelled of lye soap and boiled cabbage. 43 children lived there in 1934. By 1940, there were 72, crammed into rooms meant for half that number. The Dust Bowl had carved out families like a knife through rotted wood, and the orphanage collected what remained. Thomas grew up in that building. He learned to fight for his portion at meals, to sleep light because older boys stole shoes in the night, to ask for nothing because nothing would be given. He was small for his age until he turned 14, then he shot up suddenly, all ankles and knees and elbows. His hair was dark, almost black, and his eyes were the color of slate before a storm. The other children learned to leave him alone. He didn't participate in games. He didn't laugh at Sister Margaret's attempts at jokes during Bible study. He worked in the orphanage garden and read donated books with torn covers and missing pages. He seemed always to be waiting for something, though he couldn't have said what. In November of 1940, a black Ford automobile pulled up to the orphanage on a Tuesday morning. Snow had fallen the night before, just enough to make the world look clean for a few hours before the mud showed through. Thomas was in the garden, harvesting the last of the winter squash, when Sister Margaret called him inside. "Wash your hands and face," she said. "Change into your Sunday clothes." "Why?" "Don't ask questions. Just do it." He obeyed because that's what you did at the orphanage. You obeyed or you went hungry. He scrubbed the dirt from under his fingernails and changed into the wool trousers and white shirt kept in the communal closet for occasions like this. Adoption visits. They happened sometimes, though never for him. He was too old now. Families wanted babies, wanted young children they could mold. Nobody wanted a nearly grown boy with hard eyes and nothing to offer but labor. Sister Margaret led him to the visiting room. A man and woman sat on the threadbare sofa, their backs straight, their clothes speaking of money. The man wore a suit with a gold watch chain. The woman's dress was deep blue, and she had gloves folded in her lap. They looked at Thomas with expressions he couldn't read. "This is Thomas Avery," Sister Margaret said. "He's 17. Strong worker. Very quiet. Good with his hands." The man stood and extended his hand. "I'm Jonathan Whitmore. This is my wife, Eleanor." Thomas shook his hand. The man's grip was firm, testing. "How long have you been here, Thomas?" Jonathan asked. 11 years, sir." "And before that?" "Don't remember much before that, sir." Eleanor Whitmore studied him with eyes that seemed to measure and calculate. "Can you read?" "Yes, ma'am." "Work a farm?" "I work the garden here, ma'am." "I can learn whatever else you need." She exchanged a glance with her husband. Something passed between them, some unspoken agreement. "We have a proposition," Jonathan said. "We're looking to adopt 2 boys. You'd be one of them." Thomas felt something cold settle in his stomach. "I'm almost 18, sir. Most folks want younger." "We're not most folks." "Who's the other boy?" Sister Margaret interrupted. "Samuel Potter. He's 9. He's been quite ill, poor thing. Weak constitution. But the doctors say country air would do him good." Thomas knew Samuel. Everyone knew Samuel. He was the boy who coughed blood into handkerchiefs, who couldn't run without collapsing, who spent most days in the infirmary. He was also gentle and kind, always sharing his portions with smaller children even though he barely ate enough himself. "Why both of us?" Thomas asked. Eleanor's expression hardened slightly. "That's our business. The question is whether you'd like a home or whether you'd prefer to age out of here in a few months with nothing." It wasn't really a question. Thomas understood that. In 3 months he'd turn 18 and they'd put him out with $5 and whatever clothes he owned. Winter was coming. Jobs were scarce. Men who grew up in orphanages didn't have many prospects. "Yes, ma'am," he said. "I'd be grateful for the opportunity." "Good." She stood, smoothing her dress. "We'll complete the paperwork. You'll come home with us on Friday." Bring whatever belongings you have. They left without saying goodbye to him, speaking only to Sister Margaret in low tones by the door. Thomas watched through the window as they climbed into their automobile and drove away, leaving tracks in the thin snow. That night, he lay in his narrow bed and stared at the ceiling. Around him, other boys slept, their breathing creating a rhythm he'd grown so accustomed to that silence would have kept him awake. He tried to imagine what it would be like to live in a real house, to have a room of his own, to be part of a family. But something felt wrong. He couldn't name it, but it sat in his chest like a stone. On Friday morning, Sister Margaret helped him pack. He owned 3 shirts, 2 pairs of trousers, 1 pair of shoes with cardboard stuffed in the soles to cover the holes, a jacket, and 7 books he'd been allowed to keep from the donation pile. Everything fit in a canvas bag. Samuel waited in the visiting room, looking even smaller than usual in an oversized coat. His face was pale and dark circles shadowed his eyes. A woman Thomas didn't recognize stood with him, a nurse from the infirmary, he thought. "You're Thomas?" Samuel asked, his voice quiet. "Yeah. Sister Margaret says we're going to be brothers." "I guess so. I've never had a brother before." Samuel smiled, and despite everything, it was a genuine smile, full of hope. "This is going to be wonderful, don't you think?" Thomas picked up his bag. "We'll see." The Whitmore farm was 30 miles from Rockford, down roads that turned from pavement to gravel to dirt. They drove in silence, Samuel falling asleep against the car door, his breath fogging the window. Thomas watched the landscape change from town to country, fields stretching to horizons broken only by occasional farmhouses and barns. The Whitmore place was impressive. A 2-story white house with a wraparound porch, a massive red barn, several outbuildings, and fields that seemed to go on forever. Chickens scattered as the car pulled up. A dog barked from somewhere behind the house. "Welcome home," Jonathan said, though his tone suggested nothing welcoming about it. Eleanor opened the car door and helped Samuel out, supporting him when he stumbled. "Careful, sweetheart. We're here now." Thomas carried both his bag and Samuel's small suitcase. Nobody offered to help him. Inside, the house was clean and orderly. Hardwood floors, furniture that matched, curtains on every window. It smelled like baking bread and would smoke. A far cry from the orphanage's institutional stench. "Samuel, you'll be upstairs, first door on the right," Eleanor said. "Thomas, you're in the back room, ground floor, past the kitchen." She led Samuel upstairs herself, one arm around his shoulders. Jonathan gestured for Thomas to follow him through the house. The back room was small and plainly furnished. A bed, a chest of drawers, a single window that looked out on the fields. It had probably been a storage room once. But it was private, and the bed had real sheets and a quilt. "You'll work," Jonathan said without preamble. "Up at 5. Morning chores before breakfast. Field work during the day. Evening chores before supper. Sundays we go to church, and you'll dress properly and keep your mouth shut unless spoken to." "Yes, sir." "You'll be polite to my wife. You'll call us Mama and Papa. You understand?" Thomas hesitated. "Sir, I'm 17. It feels strange too. I don't care how it feels. That's what you'll do." "Yes, sir." Jonathan moved closer, his voice dropping. "Let me be clear about something. You're here for a reason. You do your work, you keep your head down, you don't cause problems. You're nearly a man and we need the help. That's the arrangement. But Samuel," he paused, his expression hardening. "Samuel is different. He's to be protected. He's fragile. You stay away from him unless we tell you otherwise." "I don't understand." "You don't need to understand. Just do what you're told." Jonathan left him there. Thomas unpacked his few belongings, putting his clothes in the drawers, lining his books up on top of the chest. Through the thin walls, he could hear Eleanor's voice upstairs, soft and cooing, talking to Samuel about his new room, about the nice warm quilts, about the toys she'd bought for him. Nobody came to check on Thomas. Nobody asked if he needed anything. That first night they ate supper in the dining room. Roast chicken, potatoes, green beans from the summer's canning. More food than Thomas had seen in months. But the atmosphere was tense, silent except for the scrape of forks on plates. Samuel picked at his food, eating small bites. Eleanor watched him constantly, urging him to eat more, asking if he needed anything. Thomas ate quickly, efficiently, the way he'd learned at the orphanage. "Don't taste it, just fuel." "Slow down," Eleanor said sharply. "You're not at that place anymore." He slowed down. After supper, Eleanor took Samuel upstairs for his bath. Jonathan showed Thomas where the work clothes were kept, what time to be up, where the tools were stored. 5 o'clock, he repeated. "Don't be late." Thomas wasn't late. He woke at 4:30, the habit of the orphanage too ingrained to break. He dressed in the work clothes, overalls and a flannel shirt, and went outside into the dark. The morning was cold, his breath visible in the air. He found the barn by the light of his kerosene lamp and started the chores Jonathan had described. Feeding the horses, the pigs, the chickens. Collecting eggs. Mucking out stalls. His hands, soft from months of only garden work, blistered quickly. He didn't complain. By the time the sun rose, he'd been working for 2 hours. He went inside, washed at the pump by the back door, and sat down at the kitchen table. Eleanor made breakfast, eggs, bacon, biscuits. She served Samuel first, cutting his food into small pieces, making sure his milk was warm enough. Then she served Jonathan. Then herself. Thomas waited. Finally she looked at him. "There's oatmeal on the stove. Help yourself." He ate standing up at the counter while they sat at the table. Nobody spoke to him. This became the pattern. Work before dawn, quick breakfast alone, all day in the fields with Jonathan learning to plow and plant and repair fencing. Lunch was bread and cheese brought out to wherever they worked. More work until dusk. Evening chores. Supper at the table but separate somehow, excluded from conversation. Then bed. Samuel meanwhile lived a different life. He woke late, ate elaborate breakfasts, spent mornings reading or playing with the toys Eleanor bought him. In the afternoons, he'd sometimes come outside, wrapped in blankets, and sit on the porch watching Thomas work. He'd try to talk, to ask questions, but Eleanor always called him back inside before long. "The air is too cold for you, sweetheart. But I want to talk to Thomas. Thomas is busy. Come inside." Weeks passed. Then months. Winter deepened, snow covering the fields. The work didn't stop. If anything, it increased. Repairing buildings damaged by wind, cutting firewood, tending animals that needed extra care in the cold. Thomas's hands toughened. His shoulders broadened from the labor. He grew stronger, harder. But inside, something was withering. At the orphanage, he'd been one among many. Nobody special, but nobody particularly scorned either. Here he was something different. Something less than. He heard it in the way Eleanor spoke to him. Sharp, impatient, dismissive. He felt it in the way Jonathan worked him harder each day, as if testing to see when he'd break. And he heard it one night in December, listening through the wall as Eleanor and Jonathan talked in their bedroom. "He's a good worker," Jonathan said. "I'll give him that. He's crude. No manners, no refinement. What did you expect from an orphanage?" I know. It's just, when I look at him I see exactly what he is." "Which is?" "Not ours. Not family. Just a tool we're using." Silence for a moment. Then Jonathan's voice, careful. "And Samuel?" "Samuel is our blessing. Our precious boy." Her voice softened in a way it never did when speaking to or about Thomas. "Thomas is necessary, but Samuel is everything." Thomas lay in his bed and stared at the dark ceiling. He'd known, of course. Known from the first day. But hearing it spoken aloud made it concrete, real, inescapable. He wasn't their son. He was their worker. Samuel was the one they wanted. Samuel was the one they loved. He wondered, sometimes, why they'd bothered with the charade of adoption. Why not just hire him as a farmhand? But he knew the answer. It looked better this way. The charitable couple taking in 2 orphans. It made them look good to the church, to the community. And Thomas had nowhere else to go. Christmas came. A tree in the parlor, decorations, the smell of pine and cinnamon. Eleanor spent weeks preparing, baking, wrapping presents. On Christmas morning, Samuel came downstairs to find a pile of gifts. New clothes, books, a wooden train set, a warm coat. He opened each one with delight, hugging Eleanor and Jonathan, his face bright with joy. Thomas received a pair of work gloves and a new shovel. "For all your hard work," Eleanor said, her smile not reaching her eyes. "Thank you, ma'am." "You should call me Mama," she said, but her tone made it clear she didn't mean it. "Thank you, Mama." The word felt like ash in his mouth. Samuel tried to share his gifts. "Thomas, do you want to play with the train? We could build a track together." "That's kind of you, but I have chores to finish." "On Christmas." "Animals don't know it's Christmas." He left Samuel standing there, holding the wooden train engine, confusion and hurt in his young face. In the barn, Thomas fed the horses and leaned his forehead against the rough wood of a stall. His chest felt tight, his throat thick. He hadn't cried since he was 7 years old. He wouldn't start now. But the unfairness of it sat on him like a physical weight. January brought bitter cold. The kind that froze water in buckets overnight, that made breathing hurt. Thomas worked through it, his fingers going numb inside even the new gloves, his face raw from wind. Samuel got sicker. His cough worsened and he spent more days in bed. A doctor came, a serious man with a black bag, who spoke in low tones with Eleanor and Jonathan. Thomas heard fragments. Weak lungs? Keep him warm. Rest is essential. Eleanor became even more protective, barely letting Samuel out of her sight. She read to him for hours, brought him treats, sat by his bed singing lullabies. And she became harsher with Thomas, as if his health and strength were an insult to Samuel's frailty. Don't track mud in this house. Wipe your feet, I just cleaned. Stop making so much noise, Samuel is trying to sleep. He learned to move like a ghost in the house. Quiet, unobtrusive, barely there. February arrived, and with it the first hints that winter might eventually end. The snow melted slightly during the day, freezing again at night. Thomas worked on repairing equipment for spring planting, his hands learning the feel of tools, his mind learning the rhythm of farm work. Samuel improved enough to come downstairs again. He was thinner than ever, his clothes hanging loose, but his eyes were bright. "Thomas," he said one afternoon, finding Thomas in the barn. "Will you teach me to do chores? I want to help. You're not strong enough. I could do small things. Feed the chickens maybe? Your mother," Thomas caught himself. "Mama wouldn't like it. Please? I want to be useful too." Thomas looked at the boy. 9 years old and already marked by illness, but fighting against it with everything he had. There was something admirable in that. Something that made Thomas's anger at the situation feel petty. "All right," he said. "Come on." He showed Samuel how to scatter feed for the chickens, how to check for eggs without disturbing the hens too much. Samuel laughed when a rooster chased him, delighted by the adventure of it. For a brief moment, Thomas felt something like warmth toward him. It wasn't Samuel's fault after all. The boy hadn't asked for any of this. But when they came back to the house, Eleanor was waiting on the porch, her face twisted with fury. "What were you thinking?" she shouted. "He could catch his death out there." "I'm fine, Mama," Samuel protested. "I wanted to. Inside. Now." Samuel scurried past her. She turned on Thomas. "You stay away from him. Do you understand me? He's not your playmate. He's not your friend. You are here to work and that is all." "Yes, ma'am. I mean it, Thomas. I see you encouraging him to exert himself while..." She stopped, catching herself. "You'll what?" Her eyes went cold. "You'll regret it." She went inside, slamming the door. Thomas stood on the porch, his jaw tight. Around him, the farm stretched out in all directions. Beautiful in its own way but feeling more and more like a prison. March brought thaw and mud and the beginning of spring work. Plowing, planting, endless hours behind the horse-drawn plow. Thomas's back ached constantly, his shoulders burned, his hands bled through the gloves. Jonathan pushed him harder. "You're young and strong. You can do more." He did more. Samuel watched from the window sometimes, his face pressed to the glass. Thomas would see him there and look away, that strange mixture of resentment and pity churning in his stomach. They weren't brothers. They weren't family. They were two boys caught in the same trap, but living completely different versions of it. One night in April, Thomas was woken by voices. Shouting, which was unusual in the Whitmore house. He got up, pressed his ear to his door. Eleanor and Jonathan, arguing. "Can't keep him here forever like this. He's mine. He's my son." "He's not, Eleanor. You know he's not. Not legally. Not. Don't you dare. Don't you dare say it." Silence. Then Jonathan's voice, quieter. "We agreed. We agreed to this plan. I know what we agreed. But I look at that boy upstairs and I see. She was crying. Thomas had never heard Eleanor cry. "I know," Jonathan said. "I know. But we have to maintain appearances. That's why Thomas is here. That's the whole point. I hate it. I hate having him here looking at us with those judgmental eyes. He's a child. He's almost a man. And he's not stupid. He knows something's wrong." Thomas's heart pounded. He strained to hear more, but they'd lowered their voices. Eventually he heard footsteps on the stairs, a door closing. He went back to bed but didn't sleep. His mind raced, trying to piece together what he'd heard. Samuel wasn't their son. Not legally. But Eleanor claimed he was hers. Thomas was here to maintain appearances. What did that mean? The next morning he watched them all more carefully. The way Eleanor touched Samuel's hair with such tenderness. The way Jonathan looked at the boy with something complicated in his expression. Affection, yes, but also worry, maybe guilt. The way they both looked at Thomas, like he was a necessary evil. He thought about asking, demanding answers. But he was 17 years old with nowhere to go and no one to help him. What would be the point? Spring turned to summer. The work intensified. Planting finished, now came maintenance, weeding, irrigation, endless tasks under the hot sun. Thomas grew tanned and lean, all excess weight burned away by labor. Samuel improved with the warm weather. He came outside more, played in the yard, his laughter carrying across the farm. Eleanor watched him constantly, but she seemed less frantic now, almost happy. In June they went to church every Sunday, the four of them dressed in their best clothes. The Whitmore family, charitable and upright. People smiled at them, complimented Eleanor on how well the boys looked, praised Jonathan for his generosity. Thomas stood silently through it all, shaking hands when required, saying "Thank you, sir," and "Thank you, ma'am," when people told him how lucky he was. Lucky. In July something changed. Thomas noticed it first in the way Jonathan looked at him, assessing, calculating. Then in the way Eleanor began to criticize him more. "Your table manners are atrocious. Stand up straight. Don't mumble." It felt like she was building a case against him, collecting evidence of his deficiency. Samuel noticed too. "Why is Mama so mean to you?" he asked one evening when they happened to be alone for a moment. "She's not mean. She's just proper. She doesn't talk to you the way she talks to me. You're special to her. But you're my brother. Shouldn't she?" "Samuel." Eleanor called from inside. "Time for bed." The boy ran off, leaving Thomas alone with his thoughts. In August, Samuel found an injured bird in the yard. A sparrow with a broken wing. He brought it to Thomas, cradling it in his small hands. "Can you fix it?" His eyes were wide, pleading. Thomas looked at the bird. Its wing was badly broken, probably by a cat. It wouldn't survive. "I don't think so, Samuel. But you have to try. Please?" Thomas took the bird. Samuel watched as he carefully examined it, those gentle hands that could be so cruel in Eleanor's eyes handling the tiny creature with care. "We can make it comfortable," Thomas said finally. "But Samuel, sometimes things are hurt too badly to fix. You don't know that. We have to try." They made a nest in a box, gave the bird water through an eyedropper. Samuel sat with it for hours, talking softly, his face earnest with hope. The bird died that night. Thomas found Samuel in the morning, crying over the box. He sat down next to him, unsure what to say. "I thought if I cared enough it would live," Samuel whispered. "That's not how it works." "Then how does it work?" Thomas didn't have an answer. They buried the bird under a tree at the edge of the property. Samuel said a prayer he'd learned in Sunday school. It was silly and childish and somehow deeply moving. Walking back to the house, Samuel slipped his hand into Thomas's. Thomas let him. For just that moment they were brothers. But Eleanor was watching from the window, and her expression made Thomas's blood run cold. That night, Jonathan came to Thomas's room. "We need to talk." Thomas sat up. "Yes, sir?" "You're spending too much time with Samuel. He came to me about the bird." "I didn't." "I don't care. Eleanor is concerned. She thinks you're a bad influence." "I haven't done anything wrong." "That's not the point." Jonathan sighed, rubbing his face. "Look, Thomas, this is hard to explain. But you need to keep your distance from the boy. Why did you adopt me if you didn't want me near him?" "That's not—" He stopped, searching for words. "It's complicated." "Then explain it." "I can't." They stared at each other. In that moment, Thomas saw something like regret in the older man's eyes. But it didn't change anything. "Just do what you're told," Jonathan said finally. "It's better for everyone." He left. Thomas lay back down, staring at the ceiling once more. The house creaked around him, settling into itself. Somewhere upstairs, Samuel coughed. And Thomas made a decision. He would leave. As soon as he turned 18, he would pack his bag and walk away from this place. He'd find work somewhere, anywhere. It would be hard, but it couldn't be worse than this. Just a few more months. He could survive a few more months. September arrived with cooler air and the harvest beginning. This was the busiest time on the farm, when every hand was needed. Thomas worked from dawn until well after dark, bringing in corn, soybeans, wheat. Other men were hired to help, day laborers from town, drifters looking for work. Thomas worked alongside them, grateful for the distraction of their presence, their rough camaraderie. One of them, a man named Jack who looked about 30, took an interest in him. "You're the adopted son?" he asked one day during a break. "Yeah." "Whitmore treats you like hired help." Thomas shrugged. "No shame in it," Jack said. "Work is work. But when you turn 18, you know you don't have to stay, right?" "I know." You got plans? Not yet. Jack nodded slowly. I've worked a lot of farms. If you need a reference, a place to start, let me know. There's always work for a good worker. It was a small kindness, but it felt enormous. Someone seeing him, treating him like a person with options, with a future beyond this farm. Thank you, Thomas said. Don't mention it. We orphans got to look out for each other. You were in an orphanage? Long time ago. But you don't forget it. They worked in companionable silence after that. The harvest festival came in October. The whole town gathered for it. Games, food, music, celebration of another year survived. The Whitmores attended, Samuel excited by the crowds and the activity. Thomas stayed on the farm. Someone had to watch the animals, and besides, he wasn't family. Not really. He didn't belong at their celebration. He was alone when the minister stopped by, making rounds to check on those who hadn't come. Thomas? Reverend Patterson was a kind man, round and soft-spoken. I thought you'd be at the festival. Chores don't stop for festivals, Reverend. No, I suppose they don't. He studied Thomas with sharp eyes. How are you settling in here? It's been nearly a year now. Fine, sir. You and Samuel are adjusting well? Samuel is. He's a good boy. And you? Thomas hesitated. I'm grateful for the opportunity, sir. That's not what I asked. They looked at each other. Thomas wondered how much he could say, whether it would make any difference. I'm learning a lot about farming, he said finally. The Whitmores are teaching me. That's good. That's good. The Reverend seemed like he wanted to say more, but after a moment he just nodded. Well, you know where to find me if you need anything. The church is always open. Yes, sir. Thank you. After he left, Thomas wondered if the Reverend had seen something, understood something. But it didn't matter. There was nothing anyone could do. The Whitmores were respected members of the community. Thomas was just an orphan who should be grateful. That's how everyone would see it. November came, and with it Thomas's 18th birthday. He woke that morning knowing that legally he was free now. He could walk away. But harvest wasn't quite finished. The last fields needed to be brought in. And he'd promised himself he'd at least finish what he'd started. At breakfast, nobody mentioned his birthday. It passed like any other day. That evening, Jack and the other laborers gave him a bottle of whiskey they'd pooled money to buy. For your birthday and for being free, Jack said, clapping him on the shoulder. They shared it in the barn after the Whitmores had gone to bed. It was the first time Thomas had drunk alcohol, and it burned going down, making him cough. The men laughed, but not unkindly. To freedom, Jack toasted. To freedom, Thomas echoed, though the word felt hollow. The next morning, Eleanor was waiting for him at breakfast. I understand yesterday was your birthday. Yes, ma'am. You're 18 now. An adult. Yes, ma'am. So we need to discuss your future here. His heart jumped. Were they going to ask him to leave? You've been a hard worker, she continued, and we'd like you to stay on. We'll pay you wages now, room and board plus $15 a month. You'd be an employee, not. She gestured vaguely. Not a dependent. $15 a month was decent money for farm work. Room and board saved him most expenses. He could save up, make a real start somewhere. But staying meant more of this. More being the outsider, the servant, the one who didn't belong. Can I think about it? He asked. Her eyes hardened. Of course. But Thomas, she leaned forward. Samuel has grown attached to you. If you leave suddenly, it will hurt him. You wouldn't want to hurt a sick child, would you? It was manipulation, obvious and cruel. But also effective. No, ma'am. Good. Think about it. Let us know by the end of the week. He spent the next days wrestling with the decision. Jack told him flat out to leave. This place is poison for you. I can see it. But where would he go? What would he do? At least here he had shelter, food, work he knew. And there was Samuel. The boy had done nothing wrong. He'd tried in his innocent way to be a brother, to be a friend. Thomas couldn't shake the image of Samuel's face if he left. The confusion, the hurt. On Friday he told Jonathan he'd stay. Good, Jonathan said. Good. You're making the right choice. It didn't feel like a choice. It felt like surrender. December brought the first serious snow. The farm settled into winter routines again. Thomas's second winter there, but it felt like the 10th. Samuel was having a good spell. The doctor said the country air and Eleanor's care were working miracles. He still coughed, still tired easily, but he was growing stronger. He followed Thomas around more now, chattering about books he'd read, things he'd learned from the tutor Eleanor had hired for him. Thomas listened and occasionally responded, but kept his distance emotionally. It was safer that way. Christmas came again. Another pile of presents for Samuel, another set of work clothes for Thomas. But this year Samuel gave Thomas a gift, a book he'd saved his allowance to buy. "It's an adventure story," Samuel said eagerly. "I thought you'd like it." Thomas held the book, its cover still crisp and new. Nobody had given him a real gift since his mother left him at the orphanage. "Thank you," he managed. "Do you like it?" "I do. Very much." Samuel beamed. That night, Thomas read the first chapter by lamplight. It was a good book, full of distant places and daring escapes. He wondered if Samuel had chosen it deliberately, a message encoded in the gift. The new year came. 1942 now. The war in Europe raged on, and there was talk that America would join. Thomas followed the news when he could, wondering if he'd be drafted, half hoping for it. The army would take him away from here, give him a purpose beyond this endless cycle. But the Whitmores had other plans. Jonathan applied for and received an agricultural deferment for Thomas. Essential farm labor, they said. Too important to be spared. Thomas felt the noose tighten. In February something changed. Thomas noticed Jonathan and Eleanor having more hushed conversations. They seemed nervous, worried about something. And they watched Samuel even more closely than usual. Then one night, Thomas overheard them again. "We can't keep lying forever. We've managed this long. But he's getting older. Eventually, someone will figure it out." "No one will. We've been careful." "What about Thomas?" "He's not stupid. Thomas doesn't matter. He's no one." That stung, even though Thomas had known it was true. "I just wish," Eleanor's voice broke. "I wish we could tell the truth. That Samuel is ours. That we don't have to pretend. You know why we can't? Your reputation, the church, the scandal." I know all of it. But I'm tired, Jonathan. I'm tired of lying." Their voices faded. Thomas stood in the dark, his mind racing. Samuel was theirs. Their biological son. But they were hiding it, pretending he was adopted. What? The only reason that made sense was scandal. An illegitimate child. Born outside marriage. So they created this elaborate fiction. Adopted 2 orphans, made it look like charity, when really they were hiding their own son in plain sight. And Thomas was just the cover story. The prop that made the whole thing believable. Rage filled him. White-hot and consuming. He'd been used. His whole life disrupted, his freedom stolen for their convenience. To protect their reputation. He wanted to confront them. To scream at them. To tell the whole town what they'd done. But what good would it do? Who would believe an orphan over the respectable Whitmores? And even if they did believe him, what would happen? Samuel would be the one to suffer, marked as a bastard, shunned by society. Samuel, who had no say in any of this. Thomas lay in his bed, shaking with anger and helplessness. He couldn't leave. He couldn't stay. He couldn't change anything. He was trapped. March came with warming weather. Thomas worked mechanically, going through the motions. He spoke little, ate less, moved through the days like a ghost. Samuel noticed. "Are you all right?" "I'm fine." "You seem sad." "I'm just tired." "You work too hard." "Mama says you work too hard." Thomas almost laughed. "Mama." As if Eleanor cared about his well-being. "I'm fine, Samuel. Don't worry about me." But Samuel did worry. He started trying to help with chores again despite Eleanor's protests. He'd sneak out to the barn, try to carry buckets of feed, collect eggs. "Let me help," he'd say. "You shouldn't have to do everything alone. You'll get sick." "I'm stronger now. The doctor said so." It was true. Samuel had filled out a bit, his color better, his cough less frequent. He'd never be robust, but he wasn't the fragile ghost he'd been a year ago. "Please," Samuel said. "I want to be useful. Like you." Thomas looked at him. 9 years old, no 10 now. His birthday had passed in January. Old enough to understand some things, young enough to still believe in fairness and kindness. "All right," Thomas said. "But if you start feeling tired, you stop immediately." Samuel's face lit up. They worked together that afternoon doing simple tasks. Samuel chattered happily, telling stories, asking questions. For a while, Thomas forgot his anger. It was almost nice, having company, having someone treat him like a person instead of a tool. But Eleanor saw them from the house. And that night, she summoned Thomas to the parlor. "I told you to stay away from him. He wanted to help. I don't care what he wanted. You're a bad influence." "How? By teaching him to work? By treating him kindly? Don't you dare take that tone with me. Why do you hate me so much?" The words burst out before Thomas could stop them. "I've done everything you asked. I work hard, I stay out of the way, I don't cause problems. What more do you want? I want you to know your place. Which is what? Your slave. She slapped him hard across the face. The crack of it echoed in the room. Thomas stood there, his cheek burning, tasting blood where his teeth had cut the inside of his mouth. You are nothing, Eleanor hissed. Nothing but an orphan we took in out of charity. You should be grateful. Instead, you're surly and resentful and what? Aware of what you're doing? Aware that this whole thing is a lie. Her face went white. What did you say? I know, Thomas said quietly. I know about Samuel. I know why I'm really here. For a long moment, they stared at each other. Then Eleanor's expression twisted into something ugly. You know nothing. And even if you did, who would believe you? You're nobody. You have no proof. You're just a bitter boy making up stories. She was right. Thomas knew it even as he stood there. Get out of my sight, Eleanor said, and stay away from my son. Thomas left. Behind him, he heard her start to cry. Not sad tears. Angry ones. He went to his room and packed his bag. This was it. He couldn't stay here anymore. He'd leave tonight, walk to town, find Jack or someone who could help him get started somewhere else. But as he was about to slip out the back door, he heard a sound. Small footsteps on the stairs. Samuel. The boy had heard everything, Thomas realized. He was standing at the bottom of the stairs, tears streaming down his face. You're leaving? Thomas set down his bag. Samuel. Because of me? Because Mama said. No, not because of you. But you're going. I have to. Why? How could he explain it to a 10-year-old? How could he make him understand the cruelty and manipulation, the way love could be used as a weapon? Sometimes, Thomas said carefully, people aren't meant to live together, even if they want to. But you're my brother. No, Samuel. I'm not. The words hung in the air between them. Samuel's face crumpled. I thought we were family. We're not. We never were. That was just a story they told. But I love you. The words hit Thomas like a physical blow. In the year and a half he'd been at this farm, those were the first words of love anyone had spoken to him. He knelt down, putting himself at eye level with the boy. I know you do, he said gently. And I care about you too, Samuel. But that doesn't change what this is. Your parents needed me here for reasons that have nothing to do with you and me being brothers. And I can't stay anymore. Is it because of what Mama said? I'll talk to her. I'll make her. No. You can't fix this. Then take me with you. What? Take me with you. We'll go together. We'll be brothers for real without them. Thomas felt his throat tighten. Samuel, I can't. You're 10 years old. And you're sick. You need. I'm not that sick anymore. I'm stronger. I can work. I can help. It's not about that. Then what is it about? Thomas didn't have an answer that would satisfy him. The truth, that Thomas could barely take care of himself, that he had no plan and no resources, that taking a child would be kidnapping even if that child wanted to come, was too harsh. I'm sorry, he said finally. I'm sorry for all of it. But you need to stay here. Your parents, he caught himself. Eleanor and Jonathan, they love you. They'll take care of you. And who'll take care of you? No one, Thomas thought. No one ever has. I'll be fine, he said aloud. I'm grown now. I can take care of myself. Samuel threw his arms around Thomas's neck, holding on like a drowning person holds a life preserver. Thomas hugged him back, this small boy who tried so hard to be his friend, his brother, who'd given him the only real affection he'd known in years. I'll miss you, Samuel whispered. I'll miss you too. They stayed like that for a moment. Then Thomas gently extracted himself. Go back to bed. And Samuel, he hesitated. Be good. Be happy. Don't let them make you bitter. How? I don't know. But try. Samuel nodded, wiping his face. He climbed the stairs slowly, looking back every few steps. When he was gone, Thomas picked up his bag again. But now his resolve had weakened. Could he really leave knowing it would hurt Samuel? Knowing the boy would blame himself? He stood in the dark kitchen torn. Then he heard it. A sound from upstairs. Eleanor's voice, harsh and clear. Get in your room. And don't you ever speak to that boy again. Do you understand me? But Mama. Do you understand me? Pause. Then, small and defeated, yes, Mama. Thomas set his bag down. If he left now, Eleanor would take it out on Samuel. Would blame the boy, punish him for caring about Thomas. He couldn't do that to him. So he unpacked. Again. Put his clothes back in the drawers. Lay down on his bed. He was trapped. Completely and totally trapped. And for the first time since his mother left him on those orphanage steps, Thomas cried. The next morning, Eleanor was icily polite. I trust you've reconsidered your rash decision. Yes, ma'am. Good. Samuel has been told he's not to bother you. I expect you to respect that. Yes, ma'am. Then we'll say no more about it. But of course it couldn't be left at that. Something had shifted, broken beyond repair. The tenuous balance of the household had collapsed. Jonathan pulled Thomas aside that afternoon. What were you thinking? Threatening Eleanor like that? I didn't threaten anyone. She said you claimed to know something about Samuel. Something you'd use against us. I never said I'd use anything. But you know something. Thomas met his eyes. I know enough. Jonathan's face was haggard. Listen to me. Whatever you think you know, it's more complicated than you understand. This wasn't meant to hurt anyone. Just me. You were supposed to benefit. A home, a family, a future. A lie. A chance. Jonathan's voice rose. We gave you a chance most orphans never get. You used me. We all use each other. That's how the world works. Maybe. But don't pretend it was charity. They stared at each other. Finally, Jonathan sighed. What do you want? Money? More wages. I want the truth. What truth? Is Samuel your biological son? Silence. Long and heavy. Yes, Jonathan said finally. He is. The admission hung in the air. Thomas had known, but hearing it confirmed still felt like a punch. Why? Thomas asked. Why the charade? Because Eleanor was already married. To someone else. When Samuel was born. Thomas's mind reeled. She was married to a man named Porter. A drunk and a bastard who beat her. She left him, came here, met me. We fell in love. But divorce is, he shook his head. It would have ruined her. Ruined both of us. So we pretended. Said she was a widow. Got married quietly in another county. And Samuel? Was born a year later. But if anyone knew the truth, knew the timeline, they'd realize he was conceived while she was still legally married to Porter. A bastard. An adultery baby. Eleanor would be shunned. I'd lose the respect of the community. And Samuel would carry that shame his whole life. So you adopted 2 orphans to hide one. Yes. If Samuel was adopted, no one would question his parentage. And having Thomas too made it look more genuine. More charitable. Thomas felt sick. Did you plan this from the beginning? Go to the orphanage specifically looking for? No. Not exactly. Jonathan rubbed his face. We'd been discussing it. Then the orphanage contacted us, said they had older children who desperately needed homes. We saw an opportunity. An opportunity to use children as props in your lie. To give those children homes. You think you would have been better off aging out of that orphanage? Maybe, Thomas thought. Maybe I would have. Does Samuel know? No. He thinks he's adopted. And he can never know the truth. Never. Do you understand? Why tell me all this? Because you need to understand what's at stake. If you tell anyone, if you spread this story, you won't just hurt us. You'll destroy Samuel's life. Is that what you want? It was the same emotional blackmail Eleanor had used. But it worked because it was true. Samuel was innocent in all this. He didn't deserve to be labeled a bastard, to bear the stain of his parents' choices. I won't tell anyone, Thomas said quietly. Good. Good. Jonathan looked relieved. Then we can move past this. Continue as we were. But they couldn't. Thomas knew they couldn't. The secret was too big, too poisonous. I'm staying through harvest, Thomas said. Then I'm leaving. For good. Thomas? That's the deal. I'll keep the secret, but come October I'm done. Jonathan studied him. Finally he nodded. All right. After harvest. It was April now. 6 months to endure. Thomas told himself he could make it. The next weeks were tense. Samuel was kept away from Thomas, either by Eleanor's direct intervention or by the boy's own awareness that something had changed. Thomas would see him at meals at church, but they didn't speak. The loneliness was crushing. Thomas had thought he was used to being alone, but having had even a taste of companionship made its absence worse. He threw himself into work. Planting season meant long hours, which was fine. Less time to think. Less time to feel the walls closing in. In May, a new hired hand came to help with spring work. His name was Mr. Holloway, a drifter who'd worked farms all over the state. He was probably 50, weathered and quiet, but he had kind eyes. He and Thomas worked side by side often, and gradually Holloway started talking. You're the adopted boy? Yes, sir. How's that working out? Thomas shrugged. That good, huh? Holloway smiled sadly. I was in an orphanage too. Long time ago. Never got adopted. Aged out at 16 right into the depression. That must have been hard. It was. But I survived. You will too. How do you know? Because you have that look. The survivor look. You're tough even if you don't feel like it. Thomas didn't feel tough. He felt brittle, like one more blow would shatter him completely. You planning to stay here? Holloway asked. Until harvest. Then I'm leaving. Good. This place. He looked toward the house. Something's wrong here. Can't put my finger on it, but something's off. You feel it too? Oh yeah. The way they treat you versus the boy. The way the missus watches everyone like a hawk. Something's not right. It was validating hearing someone else say it. Thomas wasn't crazy. This wasn't normal. Where will you go? Holloway asked. After harvest? Don't know yet. I've got a nephew out in Oregon. Runs a lumber operation. Always needs workers. If you want, I can write you a letter of introduction. You do that. Sure. You're a good worker. Honest. That counts for something. Oregon. Thomas had never been further than 50 miles from Rockford. Oregon might as well have been the moon. But it sounded like exactly what he needed. Distance. A fresh start. Somewhere the Whitmore name meant nothing. Thank you, Thomas said. I'd appreciate that. I'll write it before I move on. You hold on to it, use it when you're ready. In June, something happened that changed everything. Samuel got sick again. Not just his usual cough, but something worse. A fever that wouldn't break, weakness that left him bedridden. The doctor came multiple times. His expression grew more grave with each visit. Eleanor was beside herself, barely eating, barely sleeping, maintaining constant vigil by Samuel's bed. Even Jonathan seemed shaken. The doctor says it's serious. His lungs they're not improving. Thomas felt a complicated swirl of emotions. He didn't want Samuel to suffer. Whatever anger he felt toward the Whitmores, it didn't extend to the boy. Can I see him? Thomas asked. Eleanor, haggard and desperate, actually agreed. Thomas climbed the stairs to Samuel's room for the first time. It was large and sunny, full of toys and books and comfortable furniture. So different from Thomas's Spartan back room. Samuel lay in the bed, pale and small. His eyes lit up when he saw Thomas. You came? He whispered. Yeah. Mama said you didn't want to see me anymore. Thomas felt rage toward Eleanor flare up again. That's not true. She said I shouldn't bother you. You're not a bother. Samuel coughed, a wet, painful sound. I missed you. I missed you too. Are you still leaving? After harvest. Thomas hesitated. The boy was sick. Maybe dying. Should he lie? I don't know, he said finally. Let's worry about getting you better first. I don't think I'm going to get better. Don't say that. The doctor has a sad face. Mama cries when she thinks I'm sleeping. I'm not stupid. No, Thomas thought. You're not stupid. You're just a child caught in circumstances you didn't create. Tell me about Oregon, Samuel said suddenly. What? I heard you talking to Mr. Holloway. About Oregon. Tell me about it. So Thomas did. He described the forest Holloway had mentioned, tall trees reaching into the sky. The ocean, which neither of them had ever seen. Mountains and rivers and wild places where a person could start over. Samuel listened, his eyes closed, a small smile on his face. Maybe I'll go there someday, he said drowsily. When I'm grown. We could both go. Start a logging business together. Yeah. Maybe. Promise. Promise. It was a lie and they both probably knew it. But sometimes lies are kindnesses. Samuel fell asleep. Thomas sat there a while longer watching the boy breathe. Each breath seemed like a battle one. When he came downstairs, Eleanor was waiting. Thank you, she said stiffly. For what? For talking to him. He's been asking for you. Thomas nodded. I know you hate us, Eleanor continued. And maybe you have reason. But Samuel, he's innocent in all this. Whatever happens between us, he doesn't deserve to suffer for it. I know that. Do you? Sometimes I wonder if you see him as just another weapon to use against us. He's a child. I'm not going to hurt a child to get revenge on you. Something in Eleanor's face softened slightly. You're better than I thought you were. Maybe you should have tried to find that out before now. She flinched. Maybe I should have. It wasn't an apology. But it was acknowledgement. Over the next weeks, Samuel improved slightly. The fever broke. He was able to sit up, eat small amounts. The doctor was cautiously optimistic. And Eleanor was different toward Thomas. Not warm but less hostile. She allowed him to visit Samuel regularly. She even thanked him for his work occasionally. It was too little too late. But it was something. July brought scorching heat. The crops needed constant watering. Thomas worked through it, sweat soaking his clothes, his skin darkening to deep brown. Samuel was well enough to come downstairs now, though he tired quickly. He'd sit on the porch and watch Thomas work, and sometimes they'd talk. "Do you still hate us?" Samuel asked one afternoon. "I never hated you. But Mama and Papa?" Thomas thought about how to answer. "I don't hate them. But I don't trust them either. And I can't live like this anymore." "Like what?" "Like I'm not really part of things. Like I'm just here but not belonging." Samuel was quiet for a moment. "Is that how you felt at the orphanage too?" "No. At the orphanage I knew I didn't belong. Nobody did. We were all just waiting. Here I thought maybe..." He stopped. "It doesn't matter. It matters to me." Thomas looked at him. "You're a good kid, Samuel. I hope you know that. I wish you were really my brother." "Me too." August came. Harvest was approaching. Thomas's departure loomed. Then, on a warm evening, everything fell apart. Thomas was in the barn, finishing evening chores. He heard voices outside, angry, male, unfamiliar. He went to the barn door and looked out. A man stood in the yard, arguing with Jonathan. A rough-looking man, unshaven, his clothes worn. "My legal wife and I have a right. Get off my property." "Not until I see Eleanor." Thomas's blood went cold. Porter. Eleanor's first husband. Eleanor came out of the house. "Henry, what are you doing here?" "Come to see my wife." "I'm not your wife. I left you years ago. We're still married. Court says so." "I don't care what the court says. I'll never go back to you. Not asking you to. Asking you to pay me." "Pay you?" "For my silence. See, I've been hearing interesting things. About you and Whitmore here. About a boy you claim is adopted." Henry Porter smiled, showing missing teeth. "Funny thing though. That boy looks awful familiar." "Got your eyes, Eleanor." The world seemed to stop. "I don't know what you're talking about," Eleanor said, but her voice shook. "Sure you do. That's our son, isn't it? Born while you were still married to me. Makes him mine, legally speaking." "He's not yours. You were never a father to him." "Doesn't matter. I can prove you committed adultery. Can prove that boy is a bastard. Can ruin both of you." Porter looked pleased with himself. "Unless you want to make it worth my while to keep quiet." "You're blackmailing us," Jonathan said flatly. "I'm offering a business arrangement. $500 and I disappear. Don't get much fairer than that." Thomas watched from the barn, his mind racing. So this was it. The secret was out. Or about to be. "We don't have that kind of money," Eleanor said. "You got a farm, got animals, got assets. You find it. Or I go to the sheriff tomorrow and tell him everything." Jonathan stepped forward, his fists clenched. "You son of a..." "Careful now. Assault won't help your case." They stood there at an impasse. Then Samuel's voice called from inside. "Mama? What's happening?" Eleanor spun around. "Samuel, stay inside." But Samuel came out onto the porch, his small face confused. He looked at Porter. "Who's that man?" Porter studied him, his expression unreadable. "Come here, boy." "Don't you dare," Eleanor hissed. "Samuel, go inside," Jonathan ordered. But Samuel, curious and still innocent, came down the porch steps. "Are you a friend of Papa's?" Porter knelt down, bringing himself to eye level with the boy. "Something like that." "What's your name?" "Samuel." "Samuel. That's a fine name." Porter reached out as if to touch Samuel's face. Eleanor lunged forward. "Get away from him." Porter stood, laughing. "Protective, aren't you? Almost like he's your real son." "He is my son." "Then you'll pay to keep him safe. $500 by Friday, or everyone in this county knows the truth." He tipped his hat mockingly and walked away, disappearing down the road. Thomas came out of the barn. Eleanor saw him and her face went white. "You heard all that?" "Yes." "Thomas," she seemed about to say something, then just shook her head. "Take Samuel inside. Please." Thomas did, leading the confused boy into the house. Behind them, he could hear Eleanor and Jonathan's frantic whispers. Samuel looked up at him. "What's going on? Who was that man?" "Just someone your parents used to know." "Why was Mama so scared?" "Sometimes old problems come back. It's nothing you need to worry about." But it was everything to worry about. Thomas knew it. And from the fear in Samuel's eyes, The boy was starting to understand that something was very wrong. That night, Thomas couldn't sleep. He heard Jonathan and Eleanor arguing late into the night. By morning, they looked haggard and desperate. At breakfast, Jonathan spoke. "We need to talk. All of us." Samuel looked confused. Thomas waited. "There's a situation," Jonathan said carefully. "We may need to leave here. Move away. Start somewhere fresh." "Leave?" Samuel's voice was small. "But this is home." "I know, son. But sometimes we have to make difficult choices." "Is it because of that man? The one from last night?" "It's complicated." Eleanor reached across and took Samuel's hand. "Everything will be all right. We'll be together. That's what matters." But Thomas could see the lie in her eyes. Nothing was going to be all right. The next days were frantic. Jonathan tried to raise money, selling equipment, calling in debts. But $500 was an enormous sum. They might get close, but not enough. And meanwhile, Porter was waiting. Thomas considered his options. He could leave now, walk away before the whole thing exploded. It wasn't his problem. Except Samuel made it his problem. The boy clung to any sense of normalcy, and that included Thomas. "You're not leaving yet, are you?" he asked. "Not until after harvest?" "No, not yet." "Good. I need things to be normal for a little while longer." So Thomas stayed. On Thursday, Jonathan made a decision. "We can't pay him. We'll have to call his bluff." "What if he's not bluffing?" Eleanor asked. "Then we face the consequences. But I won't let that man extort us." "And Samuel?" "We'll protect him however we can." That evening, Porter returned. Jonathan met him in the yard. "Well, you got my money?" No. Porter seemed genuinely surprised. "You calling my bluff?" "Yes. Do your worst." Porter's face darkened. "You'll regret this. Both of you. That boy most of all." He left, and the household waited in tense silence for what would come next. The next morning, the sheriff arrived. Thomas watched from the barn as Sheriff Coleman spoke with Jonathan and Eleanor. Their faces grew paler with each word. Finally, the sheriff left. Jonathan came to find Thomas. "We need to talk." They went into the barn. Jonathan's hands were shaking. Porter went to the sheriff. Told him everything. About Samuel being our biological son. About the adultery. He paused. "About how we used you to cover it up." "What does that mean?" "It means there's going to be questions. An investigation. The county will get involved." "What happens to Samuel?" "I don't know. He might be taken away. Placed with another family. We might lose him." For all his anger at the Whitmores, Thomas felt a surge of protectiveness toward Samuel. "That's not fair. He didn't do anything wrong." "No. But the law doesn't always care about fair." "What can we do?" "I don't know. Eleanor is talking to a lawyer in town." "But," Jonathan's voice broke, "we're going to lose everything. The farm, our reputation, Samuel. Everything." Thomas should have felt vindicated. This was karma, justice for what they'd done to him. But instead he just felt sad. "I'm sorry," he said. Jonathan looked at him in surprise. "Why?" "Because Samuel doesn't deserve this. And maybe you and Eleanor made mistakes, but you love him. Anyone can see that. That doesn't change what we did to you." "No, it doesn't." They stood there in the dim barn, two people who'd hurt each other trying to find some kind of understanding. "What will you do?" Jonathan asked. "When all this comes out?" "I don't know. Leave probably. Like I planned." "Where will you go?" "Oregon maybe. Mr. Holloway gave me a letter." "That's far." "That's the point." Jonathan nodded slowly. "I understand." "And Thomas?" He hesitated. "I'm sorry. For all of it. I wish things had been different." "Me too." Over the next days, the situation deteriorated rapidly. Word spread through the county. The church elders came to talk. The neighbors whispered. Samuel was kept inside, shielded from it as much as possible, but he knew something terrible was happening. "Are we in trouble?" he asked Thomas one afternoon. "Your parents are." "Because of that man?" "Because of things that happened before you were born. Adult things." "Will they take me away?" Thomas wanted to lie to reassure him. But Samuel deserved honesty. "I don't know. Maybe. I don't want to leave. I don't want to go back to the orphanage." "You're not going to the orphanage." "Then where?" "I don't know, Samuel." The boy started crying. "Why is this happening? What did we do wrong?" "You didn't do anything wrong. Neither did I. But sometimes we suffer for other people's choices." It was a harsh truth for a 10-year-old. But life was harsh. The lawyer Eleanor consulted came back with bad news. The situation was complicated legally. Samuel had been registered as an adopted child, but if Porter could prove he was the biological father, which he could through blood type testing that was starting to be used, he might have legal claim to the boy. More than that, Eleanor could be charged with fraud. Jonathan could lose the farm. And Thomas was evidence of their deception. A hearing was scheduled for September. They'd present their case to a judge who would decide Samuel's fate. Eleanor became frantic, barely sleeping, crying at random moments. She looked at Samuel with desperate love, as if memorizing every detail in case she never saw him again. And she apologized to Thomas. Actually apologized. "I'm sorry," she said one evening, "for how I treated you. For using you. You deserved better." Thomas didn't know what to say. The apology felt too little too late. But it also felt genuine. "Thank you," he managed. "Will you testify? At the hearing? What would I say? That we gave you a home. That we treated Samuel well. That we're good parents. But you didn't treat me well." "I know. But you could lie. For Samuel's sake." Thomas looked at her. "You want me to lie to protect the lie you've been living?" "Yes. I'm begging you." He thought about it. Thought about Samuel, about the boy who tried so hard to be his friend. About the promise they'd made to go to Oregon together someday. "I'll think about it," he said. August turned to September. The crops were ready for harvest, but nobody had the energy to begin. The hearing was in 2 weeks. And then Porter showed up again. He came at night, drunk, shouting in the yard. "Come out, Eleanor. Come face your husband." Jonathan went out to confront him. "You've done enough damage. Leave us alone." "Not until I get what's mine." "You're not getting anything. The law is handling this now." "The law don't scare me." Porter pulled something from his coat. A knife, the blade catching moonlight. "But maybe I should scare you." Thomas watched from his window. "You should stay out of it. Should let them handle their own mess." But Samuel was in the house. And Porter was dangerous. Thomas grabbed a tool from his room, a heavy wrench, and went outside. "Put the knife away," he said. Porter turned, surprised. "Who the hell are you?" "Someone who's not going to let you threaten this family." "This ain't your family, boy. You're just the orphan they used." "Maybe. But I'm still not going to let you hurt them." Porter laughed. "Brave. Stupid but brave." He lunged at Jonathan. Thomas reacted without thinking, swinging the wrench, connecting with Porter's arm. The knife fell. Porter howled in pain and rage. He charged at Thomas and they fell to the ground, struggling. Thomas was younger and stronger, but Porter fought dirty. He got his hands around Thomas's throat, squeezing. Thomas couldn't breathe. Dark spots appeared in his vision. Then Porter's weight was gone. Jonathan had pulled him off, was wrestling him away. Eleanor appeared with a shotgun. "Get off our property. Now." Porter, holding his injured arm, stumbled back. "This ain't over." "Yes, it is. You come back here again, I'll shoot you for trespassing." Porter left, cursing. Thomas lay on the ground, gasping for air. Samuel was on the porch, crying. Jonathan helped Thomas up. "You all right?" "Yeah." "Why did you help us?" "Because Samuel was inside. And he's seen enough violence for one life." That night they called the sheriff. Porter was arrested for assault and trespassing. The knife, they later learned, was also stolen. He wouldn't be threatening anyone for a while. But the hearing was still coming. The day arrived. They dressed in their best clothes and drove to the county courthouse. Thomas had decided to testify, to say what he could to help Samuel. Not for Jonathan and Eleanor's sake. For Samuel's. The courtroom was packed. Everyone wanted to see the scandal unfold. The Whitmores, the upstanding family, revealed as liars and adulterers. The judge was an old man named Harrison, known for being strict but fair. He heard Porter's lawyer first, laying out the case. Eleanor was still legally married to Porter when Samuel was conceived. The child was therefore legitimate issue of that marriage. Porter had legal rights. Then Eleanor's lawyer presented their case. Porter was an abusive drunk who'd abandoned Eleanor. She'd created a stable, loving home for Samuel. Taking the boy away would be cruel. Witnesses testified. Jonathan's business partners vouched for his character. The doctor talked about Samuel's health improving under Eleanor's care. Then they called Thomas. He walked to the stand, aware of every eye on him. The orphan. The pawn. "Mr. Avery," the judge said. "You've lived with the Whitmores for nearly 2 years now. Tell me about that experience." Thomas thought carefully about his words. "It wasn't what I expected," he said. "I thought I'd be part of a family. Instead, I was Something else. Explain. They treated Samuel like a son. They treated me like a worker. I did all the labor, got none of the affection. It was clear from the start that I wasn't really their child. Eleanor's lawyer looked panicked. This wasn't helping their case. But Thomas continued. However, none of that was Samuel's fault. He tried to be my friend, my brother. He's a good kid. Kind and gentle and smart. And the Whitmores? He paused. They do love him. Really love him. I can't deny that. So you believe Samuel is well cared for? Yes, sir. I do. Even though they used you? What they did to me doesn't change what's best for Samuel. And what's best for him is staying with the only parents he's ever known. The judge studied him. That's a mature perspective, Mr. Avery. I've had to grow up fast, sir. I imagine you have. When Thomas stepped down, Samuel was watching him with tears in his eyes. Eleanor looked stunned. The hearing continued. More witnesses, more testimony. Finally, the judge called for a recess to consider his decision. They waited in the hallway. Samuel sat pressed against Thomas's side. Thank you, he whispered. Don't thank me yet. We don't know what he'll decide. An hour later they were called back. Judge Harrison looked grave. This is a difficult case. Mr. Porter is correct that legally he is Samuel's father. However, he has shown no interest in the boy until now, and his motives appear financial rather than paternal. Hope flickered in Eleanor's eyes. Mrs. Whitmore, you have admitted to fraud, to adultery, to using an adopted child to cover your deception. These are serious matters. Yes, Your Honor. However, it's also clear that you genuinely love Samuel and have provided him excellent care. Removing him from your custody would harm him more than help him. So, Eleanor could barely speak. So he can stay? Yes, but with conditions. Mr. Porter's parental rights will be terminated based on his abandonment and his criminal record. You will be fined for the fraud. And, the judge looked at Thomas. Mr. Avery, you are legally free from this adoption as of today. You may leave if you choose or remain as a paid employee. The choice is yours. Free. The word echoed in Thomas's mind. Thank you, Your Honor, he managed. Outside the courthouse, Eleanor collapsed in relief, holding Samuel so tightly he squeaked in protest. Jonathan stood with his hands shaking, overcome. Samuel looked at Thomas. Are you going to leave? Eventually. When? After harvest. Like I planned. Can I write to you? In Oregon. Thomas felt his throat tighten. Yeah, you can write to me. They drove home in silence, too emotionally exhausted to speak. But that night, as Thomas packed his bag for the final time, Samuel appeared at his door. I made you something. He held out a small wooden carving. A bird, rough but recognizable. I've been working on it since you taught me about the injured sparrow. It's not very good, but it's perfect. Thomas took it, turned it over in his hands. Thank you, Samuel. Will you really write to me? I promise. And maybe someday I can come to Oregon too? Thomas knelt down, putting himself at eye level with the boy one last time. Maybe. When you're older. When you're ready. I'll work on getting ready. Thomas smiled. You do that. They hugged, this boy and this almost man who'd been brothers for a while, in the ways that mattered. The next morning, Thomas said goodbye to the Whitmores. Eleanor gave him money, more than he was owed, her way of trying to make amends. Jonathan shook his hand. Good luck, Thomas. You too. And Samuel stood on the porch, waving as Thomas walked down the road with his bag and Mr. Holloway's letter. He didn't look back. He was free. That's what Thomas Avery believed anyway in September of 1942 as he walked away from the Whitmore farm toward his new life. He couldn't have known that freedom was an illusion, that the worst was yet to come. Thomas made it to Rockford by midday, his legs aching from the walk. The town looked different somehow, smaller, less significant. How had this place contained his entire world for so long? He stopped at the diner, bought a cheap meal with some of the money Eleanor had given him. The waitress recognized him. You're that Whitmore boy, aren't you? The adopted one? Used to be. Heard about all that business at the courthouse. What a scandal. Thomas didn't respond. Where you headed? West. She seemed to expect more, but he didn't elaborate. He ate quickly and left. The bus station was a small building with peeling paint. A bus heading toward Kansas City was leaving in an hour. From there, he could connect to routes going further west. He bought his ticket, counting out the bills carefully. It took almost half his money, but it would get him most of the way to Oregon. He sat on the bench outside, waiting, watching the town move around him. People who'd lived here their whole lives, who'd die here too, probably. That had almost been him. A shadow fell across him. He looked up. Henry Porter. Well, the loyal little orphan. Thomas stood slowly. Mr. Porter. Thought you'd be long gone by now. I'm leaving. That's smart. Nothing for you here. Porter moved closer and Thomas could smell whiskey on his breath. You cost me, that testimony of yours. If you'd kept your mouth shut, Samuel would still have stayed with them. The judge saw what you are. Porter's face darkened. Watch your mouth, boy. Or what? You'll assault me again? You're out on bail as it is. You want to go back to jail? For a moment, Thomas thought Porter might hit him anyway. But then the man laughed, bitter and harsh. You think you're so smart, so righteous. But you're just a stupid kid who got used. Maybe. But at least I'm not you. That hit home. Porter's expression twisted with rage. You'll regret this. All of it. Mark my words. He walked away, stumbling slightly. Thomas watched him go, unease settling in his stomach. But the bus arrived and he pushed the encounter from his mind. He boarded, found a seat, and pressed his face to the window as Rockford disappeared behind him. He was leaving. Finally, truly leaving. The journey took days. Bus to Kansas City, then another to Denver, another to Salt Lake City. Thomas slept in bus stations, ate cheap food, stretched his money as far as it would go. He watched the landscape change. Flat plains giving way to mountains, mountains to desert, desert eventually to green forests as he approached the Pacific Northwest. Oregon was everything Holloway had described. Tall trees, clean air, a sense of space and possibility. Thomas arrived in a small logging town called Timber Ridge with $5 left and Holloway's letter in his pocket. He found the lumber operation easily enough. A large compound of buildings surrounded by forest, the sound of saws and axes filling the air. The foreman was a man named Davies, big and blunt. You Holloway's friend? Yes, sir. He says you're a hard worker. I am. Room and board plus $20 a month. Work starts at dawn, ends at dusk. You break something, you pay for it. You cause trouble, you're out. Clear? Yes, sir. Good. Get yourself settled, you start tomorrow. It was that simple. Thomas had a job, a place to sleep, a new start. The work was brutal. Harder even than farming. Felling trees, hauling logs, operating machinery that could kill you if you weren't careful. Men lost fingers, limbs, sometimes their lives. But Thomas threw himself into it. Physical exhaustion meant less time to think, to remember, to regret. The other workers mostly left him alone. He was young, quiet, kept to himself. A few tried to befriend him, but Thomas held himself apart. He wrote to Samuel once, a short letter with his new address. He didn't know if the boy would write back. But 3 weeks later, a letter arrived. The handwriting was careful, each word formed with obvious effort. Dear Thomas, I miss you. Mama and Papa are better now. They smile more. Papa said the farm is doing well. I'm learning my lessons with the tutor. I read 3 books this month. One was about Oregon. Did you know there are animals called beavers that build dams? I'd like to see one someday. Are you well? Is Oregon nice? I think about you every day. Your brother, Samuel. Thomas read it several times, a lump in his throat. He wrote back describing the trees and the work, keeping it light and friendly. Thus began a correspondence. Samuel wrote every week or two, his letters full of childish observations and questions. Thomas wrote less frequently, but he always wrote back. It was a connection, however thin, to something that had mattered. Months passed. Thomas grew stronger, more skilled. He earned a small raise. He started to think about the future, about maybe saving enough to start his own operation someday. And then, in March of 1943, everything fell apart. A letter arrived, but not from Samuel. The handwriting was Eleanor's. Thomas, I don't know how to write this. There's been an accident. Samuel is missing. He went into the woods behind the farm 2 days ago. We've searched everywhere, but we can't find him. The sheriff is searching. The neighbors are searching. I don't know why I'm writing to you. You're so far away. But Samuel loved you and I thought you should know. If we find him, when we find him, I'll write again. Eleanor. Thomas's hands shook as he read it. Samuel missing in the woods. The boy was 11 now, stronger than he'd been, but still not robust. Still fragile. How long could he survive out there? Thomas went to Davies. I need time off. Family emergency. How long? Don't know. Could be a week, could be more. Can't promise your job will be here when you get back. I understand. He packed his bag and caught the first bus east. The journey back took 3 days and every minute felt like an eternity. Thomas tortured himself with possibilities. Samuel lost and cold. Samuel injured. Samuel. He wouldn't let himself finish the thought. He arrived in Rockford on a rainy afternoon and hired a wagon to take him to the Whitmore farm. The driver was full of talk. Terrible thing, that boy going missing. Whole county's been searching. Course, with all that scandal last year, some folks are saying. What are they saying? The driver glanced at him. Well, you know. Questions about whether he really went missing. Or if something else happened. Thomas's blood went cold. What are you suggesting? I'm not suggesting nothing. Just repeating what folks are saying. When they reached the farm, Thomas threw money at the driver and ran to the house. Eleanor answered the door. She looked like she'd aged 10 years, gray-faced, hollow-eyed, barely holding together. Thomas? You came. Where is he? What happened? She led him inside. Jonathan sat at the kitchen table, maps spread out in front of him. He looked up. We've searched everywhere. The woods, the river, the caves. Nothing. Tell me exactly what happened, Thomas demanded. It was afternoon, Eleanor said, her voice breaking. Samuel said he wanted to go for a walk. It was a nice day and he'd been feeling good. I said yes, told him not to go far. And? He didn't come back. By supper we were worried. By dark we were frantic. We've been searching ever since. 2 days, Jonathan said. He's been out there for 2 days. Thomas closed his eyes, thinking. Samuel knew those woods. They'd explored them together back when Thomas still lived here. Did you check the old hunter's cabin? The one about 2 miles south. What cabin? Samuel and I found it once. It's half collapsed, but it has a roof. If he got turned around, he might have gone there for shelter. Jonathan grabbed his coat. Show me. They took horses, riding hard through the rain. The woods were treacherous, mud making the path slippery. But Thomas remembered the way. The cabin was exactly as he remembered, a small structure nearly swallowed by undergrowth. The door hung open. Samuel? Thomas called. Samuel, are you here? No answer. They dismounted and went inside. The cabin was empty, cold, dark. But there were signs someone had been there. A scrap of cloth caught on a nail. Fresh footprints in the dust. He was here, Jonathan said. But where did he go? Thomas studied the footprints. They led to the back of the cabin, to a gap in the floorboards. He knelt down, peering through. Below was a crawl space, and in the dim light he could make out a small form. Samuel. The form didn't move. Thomas ripped up the floorboards, widening the gap. He dropped into the crawl space, his heart pounding. Samuel lay on the ground, unconscious. His skin was cold, his lips blue. But he was breathing. He's here. He's alive. They pulled him out carefully. Samuel's eyes fluttered open. Thomas? His voice was barely a whisper. Yeah, I'm here. I got lost. I fell through the floor. I couldn't get out. You're okay now. We've got you. They wrapped him in coats and rode back as fast as they dared. Eleanor met them at the door, crying in relief. The doctor was called. Samuel had a broken ankle from the fall, exposure, dehydration. But he'd survive. He's lucky, the doctor said. Another night and he might not have made it. Eleanor collapsed in gratitude. Jonathan gripped Thomas's shoulder. Thank you. If you hadn't remembered that cabin, I'm just glad we found him. That night, after Samuel was settled in bed, Thomas sat with him. You came back, Samuel said. Of course I did. I knew you would. I told Mama you'd come. You should rest. Will you stay? Just for a little while? Thomas stayed. Over the next days, as Samuel recovered, Thomas helped around the farm. It felt strange being back, but different somehow. The anger he'd carried had faded, replaced by something more complicated. Eleanor was different too. She thanked him constantly, her gratitude genuine. She apologized again for how she'd treated him. I was wrong about you, she said. You're a good person, Thomas. Better than I deserved. I'm just glad Samuel's okay. Are you staying? We'd like you to stay. I can't. I have a life in Oregon now. But Samuel needs you. Samuel needs to learn that people leave sometimes. And that's okay. But staying longer than he'd planned meant missing the departure of his bus back west. He'd have to wait another week. In that week, something shifted. Thomas found himself falling back into old routines. Morning chores, meals at the table, conversations with Samuel. It felt dangerously close to belonging. One evening, he and Jonathan talked while repairing a fence. You could stay, you know, Jonathan said. Permanently. We'd make it official. Pay you well, treat you right. What? So I can be the hired hand for real this time? No. So Samuel can have his brother back. I'm not his brother. You're the closest thing he has. Thomas hammered a nail, considering. It wouldn't work. Too much has happened. Maybe. But you're thinking about it. He was. That was the problem. But then something happened that made the decision for him. Henry Porter returned. Thomas was in the barn when he heard shouting. He ran outside to find Porter in the yard, drunk and furious. Your fault? He screamed at the house. All of it your fault. Jonathan came out. Get out of here, Henry. You're not welcome. Not welcome? This is my farm. My wife. My son. The court said otherwise. I'll show them. I'll show all of you. Porter pulled out a gun. Thomas's blood turned to ice. Samuel was in the house. Put it down, Jonathan said, his voice steady despite his fear. No. I'm done losing. Done being humiliated. Porter aimed at Jonathan. You took everything from me. I didn't take anything. Eleanor left you because you were a drunk and an abuser. Liar. His finger tightened on the trigger. Thomas ran. He hit Porter from the side, tackling him. The gun went off, the shot wild. They struggled. Porter was stronger than Thomas remembered, fueled by alcohol and rage. He got on top of Thomas, raising the gun to strike him with it. A second shot rang out. Porter jerked, his eyes wide with surprise. He looked down at his chest, where blood was spreading. Then he fell. Eleanor stood on the porch, the shotgun in her hands, smoke rising from the barrel. I told him, she said, her voice strange and distant. I told him if he came back, I'd shoot him. Porter lay in the dirt, not moving. Dead. The sheriff came. There was an investigation. But the verdict was clear: self-defense. Eleanor had protected her family from a dangerous intruder. Still, the aftermath was chaos. More scandal, more gossip, more attention on the Whitmore family. And in the middle of it, Samuel got sick again. The stress, the doctor said. The trauma. It had weakened his already fragile constitution. Within days, Samuel was bedridden, feverish, struggling to breathe. He's not getting better, Eleanor told Thomas, her eyes desperate. The doctor says. She couldn't finish. Thomas sat with Samuel as much as possible. The boy drifted in and out of consciousness, sometimes lucid, sometimes delirious. Don't leave, he whispered during one lucid moment. Promise you won't leave. I'm right here. Forever. Thomas couldn't promise that. For as long as you need me. But Samuel was fading. Everyone could see it. 2 weeks after Porter's death, on a quiet evening in April, Samuel slipped away. Thomas was holding his hand when it happened. One moment the boy was breathing, shallow but steady. The next he was gone. Eleanor's scream could be heard throughout the house. The funeral was small. Just family and a few close friends. Samuel was buried in the church cemetery, under a tree he'd loved to climb when he was feeling well enough. Thomas stood at the graveside, dry-eyed, his grief too deep for tears. He loved you, Eleanor said quietly. You know that, don't you? I know. I'm sorry you didn't have longer together. Thomas didn't respond. What was there to say? After the funeral he packed his bag. Oregon waited. He had nothing left here now. But as he was leaving, the sheriff stopped by. Thomas? Need to talk to you. About what? About Samuel's death. Thomas felt cold. What about it? There's been questions. About the timing. About the circumstances. He was sick. Everyone knows that. Yes, but the sheriff shifted uncomfortably. There's been talk. About how maybe it wasn't natural. What are you suggesting? I'm not suggesting anything. But Porter's lawyer, before he died, he filed some papers. Claimed that Samuel wasn't safe in the Whitmore household. Claimed there was a history of, he paused, of violence. Thomas understood where this was going. You think someone hurt Samuel? I think I have to investigate. That's all. Then investigate. You won't find anything because nothing happened. Samuel died because he was sick. Maybe. But there's pressure from the county. They want answers. Over the next days, the investigation deepened. The doctor who'd treated Samuel was questioned. Eleanor and Jonathan were questioned. And Thomas was questioned. You and Samuel were close? Yes. But you left. Went to Oregon. I had a job there. Must have been hard leaving him behind. It was. Were you angry about that? About having to choose between your life and the boy? No. I understood. Did you? The questions went on. Invasive, suspicious, looking for guilt where there was none. But Thomas wasn't the focus. Eleanor was. The prosecutor, a zealous man named Patterson, was building a case. She killed Porter in cold blood, he said publicly. And then, fearing that Samuel would eventually reveal the truth about his parentage, she silenced him too. It was absurd. Eleanor had loved Samuel more than anything. But Patterson was convincing. And the community, still reeling from scandal after scandal, was ready to believe the worst. Eleanor was arrested. The trial was set for June. Thomas stayed, unable to abandon her despite everything. Jonathan was a broken man, barely functioning, convinced his wife would hang. The trial was a circus. Everyone in the county attended. The prosecutor laid out his case. Eleanor had a motive, protecting her secret, means access to medicines that could stop a weak heart, and opportunity. The defense argued that Samuel's death was natural, a result of his chronic illness and recent stress. But the doctor admitted, under pressure, that he couldn't rule out the possibility of foul play. Thomas was called to testify. Patterson questioned him aggressively. You lived in that house. You saw how Mrs. Whitmore treated people. She was cold, wasn't she? Calculating? She was protective of Samuel. Protectiveness can be a motive for murder if the secret she was protecting was big enough. She didn't kill him. How do you know? Because I was there. I saw her grief. It was real. Or perhaps it was guilt. The questioning went on. Patterson tried to paint Thomas as another victim of Eleanor's manipulation, too naive to see the truth. But Thomas held firm. She loved that boy. Whatever else she did wrong, she loved him. She didn't kill him. The trial lasted 2 weeks. Then the jury deliberated. They came back with a verdict, guilty of murder in the first degree. Eleanor was sentenced to life in prison. The courtroom erupted. Jonathan sobbed. Eleanor stood still, her face blank with shock. Thomas felt like the world had ended. Afterward, he was allowed to speak to Eleanor briefly before she was taken away. I'm sorry, he said. I tried. I know you did. She smiled sadly. Thank you for believing me. Because I know you didn't do it. That doesn't seem to matter, does it? She looked at him, really looked at him, and he saw the woman beneath the bitterness and the lies. Take care of Jonathan. He'll need help with the farm. I'm not staying. Please. You're all he has left now. Thomas wanted to refuse. Wanted to walk away from this cursed place and never look back. But he thought about Samuel, about the promise he'd made to stay as long as he was needed. For a while, he said. Just until he's on his feet. Eleanor nodded. That's all I ask. She was led away in chains. Thomas helped Jonathan with the harvest that year and the next. He stayed as the farm recovered, as the gossip died down, as life slowly returned to something resembling normal. He stayed even though he knew he shouldn't, even though Oregon called to him in his dreams. He stayed because leaving felt like abandonment. But one morning in 1945, he woke and realized he was 23 years old and he'd spent 7 years of his life trapped by other people's choices. He told Jonathan he was leaving. I understand, Jonathan said. He looked old now, bent by grief and scandal. You've given more than you should have. I'm sorry about everything. So am I. Thomas packed for the last time. As he was leaving, Jonathan handed him an envelope. What's this? Money. From the sale of some equipment. It's yours. Payment for all the years you worked here. Thomas tried to refuse, but Jonathan insisted. Take it. Start your life. Finally. So Thomas did. He went back to Oregon, back to Timber Ridge, back to the lumber operation. Davies, surprisingly, gave him his job back. Heard about what happened, Davies said. That's rough. But you're here now. That's what matters. Thomas settled back into the work, into the rhythm of trees and saws and exhaustion. He tried to move on. But at night he dreamed of Samuel. Of the boy's smile, his laugh, his innocence. And he wondered if things might have been different. If he'd stayed, could he have protected Samuel? Could he have prevented his death? The guilt ate at him. Years passed. Thomas grew older, harder, more isolated. He worked, saved money, kept to himself. In 1950 he heard that Eleanor had died in prison. Heart failure, the report said. In 1953 Jonathan passed away. The farm was sold to pay debts. Thomas was alone now. Truly alone. He thought about moving on, going somewhere new, starting fresh. But where? And to what end? He was 31 years old and he'd never belonged anywhere. So he stayed in Timber Ridge, working, existing, but not really living. Until 1960, when a letter arrived. It was from a lawyer in Missouri. Dear Mr. Avery, I represent the estate of Eleanor Whitmore. In going through her effects after her death, certain documents were discovered that may be of interest to you. Specifically, a journal Mrs. Whitmore kept during her time in prison. In it, she writes extensively about the events surrounding Samuel's death. I think you should read it. Please contact my office at your earliest convenience. Sincerely, Robert Chin, attorney at law. Thomas stared at the letter. Eleanor's journal. What could it possibly say? He wrote back requesting a copy. It arrived 2 weeks later, pages and pages of Eleanor's handwriting, covering the years 1943 to 1950. Thomas read it in one sitting and learned the truth. The journal told the story Eleanor had never been allowed to tell in court. Samuel hadn't died of natural causes. But Eleanor hadn't killed him either. Henry Porter, before his death, had contaminated medicine that Samuel took regularly. A slow poison, impossible to detect with 1940s technology. He'd done it weeks before his final confrontation with the family, planning it as revenge. Eleanor had figured it out too late. After Samuel died, she found Porter's notes hidden in the barn. But by then Porter was dead and telling the truth would have meant nothing. Who would believe her? So she'd stayed silent, accepting conviction for a crime she didn't commit, because at least that way Samuel's death made sense. At least that way people weren't asking endless questions, dragging his name through more scandal. She'd sacrificed herself for her son's memory. And Thomas had never known. He sat with that knowledge for days. Eleanor had died in prison for a crime she didn't commit. Had chosen that fate rather than let Samuel's name be further tarnished. It was, in its own twisted way, an act of love. Thomas tried to get the conviction overturned posthumously. He went to Missouri, talked to lawyers, showed them the journal. But without physical evidence, without Porter alive to confess, there was nothing they could do. The conviction stood. Eleanor would be remembered as a murderer forever. Thomas returned to Oregon defeated. He was 38 years old now and he felt ancient. He thought about Samuel constantly. About the bright boy with the generous heart who tried so hard to be his brother. About how much life Samuel should have had ahead of him. About how Porter had stolen that future out of pure spite. And about how Thomas himself had failed to protect him. Rationally, he knew there was nothing he could have done. He'd been in Oregon when Porter poisoned the medicine. He couldn't have stopped it. But guilt doesn't care about rationality. So Thomas lived with it. Worked, drank, grew older, alone. In 1965, on a cold February day, he was working when a tree fell wrong. It crushed his leg, shattered the bone beyond repair. They saved his life but couldn't save the leg. He woke in the hospital to find it gone below the knee. "You're lucky," the doctor said. "Could have been much worse." Lucky. That word again. Thomas learned to walk with a prosthetic. Learned to work with his disability. But something in him had broken with that leg. Whatever small hope he'd been carrying that life might improve, that he might find peace. He was 43 years old and crippled and alone and haunted by ghosts. He retired from logging, unable to do the physical work anymore. He got a job as a clerk in a general store in Timber Ridge. It was quiet work, boring, safe. He existed. Years blurred together. 1970, 1975, 1980. Thomas grew old before his time, gray and bent and silent. The townspeople knew him as the quiet man who worked at the store, who never smiled, who had no family. Nobody knew his story. Nobody asked. Until 1986. Thomas was 64 years old, working his shift at the store when a young man walked in. He was maybe 30, with dark hair and familiar eyes. "Excuse me," the young man said. "I'm looking for Thomas Avery?" Thomas felt his heart skip. "That's me. My name is David Potter. I'm a reporter for the Kansas City Star. I'm doing a story on wrongful convictions and I came across the Eleanor Whitmore case. That was a long time ago. I know. But I've been researching it and I think she was innocent. I think there's a story here that needs to be told." Thomas studied him. "Why do you care?" "Because I believe in truth. And because," he hesitated. "My grandmother was Eleanor's neighbor back in the 40s. She always said the conviction was wrong. She made me promise to look into it if I ever became a journalist." So Thomas told him everything. About the orphanage, the adoption, the secrets and lies. About Samuel and Porter and the trial. About Eleanor's journal. David listened, taking notes, asking questions. "This is incredible," he said finally. "This needs to be published. It won't change anything. Everyone involved is dead. It'll change the record. It'll give Eleanor her name back." Thomas thought about that. Eleanor, who died in prison defending her son's memory. Didn't she deserve to be remembered correctly? "All right," he said. "Tell the story." David's article was published in June of 1986. It was thorough, well-researched, damning. It laid out the evidence of Porter's guilt, Eleanor's journal, the flaws in the original investigation. It called for a posthumous exoneration. The story went national. Newspapers picked it up. Television news ran segments on it. And finally, in August of 1986, the Missouri governor issued a posthumous pardon for Eleanor Whitmore, officially clearing her name. David called Thomas with the news. "You did it," he said. "You got her exonerated." Thomas felt something loosen in his chest. Not quite peace but close. "Thank you," he said. "I should be thanking you. This story, it's going to win awards. It's the biggest story of my career." Good, Thomas thought. Let something good come from all this horror. But there was one more piece of the story David wanted to explore. "I've been looking into Henry Porter's life," he said, "trying to understand why he did what he did. And I found something interesting." "What?" "Porter had a son from a previous relationship. A boy he abandoned. That boy ended up in the Rockford orphanage." Thomas felt cold. "When?" 1932. The boy's name was Timothy Porter. "He was there when you were there." Timothy Porter. Thomas vaguely remembered him. A mean kid, several years older, who'd bullied the younger children. "He aged out in 1938, David continued. 2 years before you were adopted. And here's where it gets interesting. Timothy spent those 2 years working odd jobs around Rockford, including occasional work for the Whitmores." The implications hit Thomas like a physical blow. He knew. Porter knew about Samuel because his son told him. It looks that way, yes. Timothy must have seen something, overheard something, and reported back to his father. That's how Porter knew to blackmail them. So it all traced back even further. To an abandoned child, to the cycles of abuse and neglect that created men like Porter. To the orphanage. To Thomas himself. "There's one more thing," David said carefully. "Timothy Porter is still alive. He lives in Springfield. I talked to him." "What did he say?" "He confirmed everything. Said his father told him the plan, to poison Samuel, to frame Eleanor. He knew and he said nothing." Rage filled Thomas. "Where is he? I want to talk to him." "Thomas, he's a sick old man. Dying of cancer. And he's haunted by it. What he did, what he didn't do. He wanted me to tell you he's sorry." Sorry. As if that mattered. As if that brought Samuel back. But Thomas was 64 years old and tired. What would vengeance accomplish now? "Tell him," Thomas paused. "Tell him he should have been better." "I will." David's follow-up article about Timothy Porter's role created another sensation. There were calls for charges, but Timothy died before anything could be pursued. And with his death, the last living person connected to the tragedy was gone. Except Thomas. He lived 3 more months after Timothy's death. Long enough to see Eleanor's name cleared publicly, long enough to visit her grave and tell her spirit that the truth was known. Long enough to visit Samuel's grave too, to place flowers and say goodbye properly. Then, on a November morning in 1986, Thomas Avery died in his sleep. Heart failure, the doctor said. Peaceful. He was alone when it happened, just as he'd been alone for most of his life. The town buried him quietly. David Potter came to the funeral and gave a eulogy about truth and justice and the importance of never giving up. But Thomas's story wasn't about triumph. It was about survival, about carrying wounds that never healed, about being used and broken and somehow continuing anyway. He'd spent 45 years haunted by Samuel's death. 45 years believing he'd failed to protect the one person who'd shown him genuine love. And in the end he'd learned the truth. There was nothing he could have done. The tragedy was set in motion long before he arrived, by people who saw children as tools, as weapons, as things to be used. Thomas had been a victim just as much as Samuel. But victims don't get happy endings. They just get endings. And Thomas's ending was quiet, lonely, and utterly unfair. Epilogue: The Truth Buried. In 1987, a year after Thomas's death, historian Margaret Chin, no relation to the lawyer, was researching wrongful convictions for a book when she came across David Potter's articles. She decided to dig deeper into the original case files, accessing documents that had been sealed for decades. What she found changed everything. Hidden in the trial transcripts was a piece of evidence that had been suppressed. A letter Samuel had written to Thomas the week before he died. It had been intercepted by Eleanor, who'd kept it hidden because she feared its contents. The letter, in Samuel's careful handwriting, said, "Dear Thomas, I need to tell you something important. I heard Mama and Papa talking about medicine Mr. Porter gave me. They said I shouldn't take it, but I already did. I don't feel good. I'm scared, Thomas. Something is wrong. Please come home. Your brother, Samuel." Samuel had known. He'd known he'd been poisoned. and he tried to reach out to the one person he trusted. But the letter never reached Thomas. If he'd come immediately, would Samuel have survived? Could they have gotten him medical treatment in time? Margaret Chin published her findings. David Potter wrote a follow-up article. The story made national news again. And everyone agreed, Thomas Avery had been robbed twice. Once of his childhood and once of the chance to save his brother. He died never knowing that Samuel had called for him at the end. That, perhaps more than anything, was the cruelest twist of all. The story faded from public consciousness after a few months. Lives moved on. Other scandals, other tragedies took its place. But in Rockford, Missouri, they placed a memorial plaque in the church cemetery. It reads, Samuel Whitmore, 1932 to 1943, beloved son and brother taken too soon by cruelty and hatred. Thomas Avery, 1922 to 1986, who never stopped trying to save him. May they rest in peace together, finally free. It's a nice sentiment. But Thomas Avery never found peace. Not in life and perhaps not in death either. He was 17 years old when he entered the Whitmore household, full of hope despite everything. He was 64 when he died, hollowed out by grief and guilt and the weight of truths he'd learned too late. 47 years of his life, shaped by 1 year on a farm in Missouri. That's the real tragedy. Not just that Samuel died, or that Eleanor was wrongly convicted, or that Porter's evil went unpunished for so long. But that Thomas, innocent, hard-working, loyal Thomas, never got to live a life of his own. He was always defined by what happened in 1940 to 1943. Always haunted by it. Always trapped by it. And when he finally died, alone in a small room in Oregon, his last thoughts were probably of Samuel. Of the brother he couldn't save. Of the promise he couldn't keep. Of the life that should have been. The end.